I'm here at Super Investor US 2014 with Nick Sturiale, one of the managing partners of Ignition Partners, a boutique venture capital firm focusing on big data based in California and Washington.
Yes.
A couple of questions for you, Nick. First, the public perception of venture capital has been very much driven by the big firms,
Yes.
the high-profile transactions, the Facebooks, the consumer-facing IPOs. Do you think LPs share that perception? And if so, what are the risks for the industry from that?
I think the risks are not unlike what happened in Hollywood. I think when Jaws or Close Encounters came out, it becomes a kind of complete preoccupation with giant big hits. And I think the model tends to chase then very large outcomes. And so the challenge is there are just not that many very large outcomes, and yet the capital floods the zone and bets on a lot of players to become the next big hit. And so you do run the risk of driving the performance downward in sort of the chase for the big outcome. Right. Because if you look across the landscape, the median acquisition price hasn't really moved that much. It's still anywhere from $60 to $80 million. And so valuations climbing up and up and up will tend to drive down returns for the industry as a whole.
And you think that will feed through to the LPs as well?
Yes. So I think what you're starting to see is a bit of a bifurcation between the very large bulge bracket firms that everybody knows and you talked about. And then I think you're starting to see a real serious band of new entrants that I could call them boutiques. I think Ignition is one of them, where they're 2 and 3 person firms that raise anywhere from 50 to 150 million, where it's a very different service model and a very different approach towards early stage and very capital efficient plays and a focus on valuation.
Well, in some ways those models look like the Kleiner Perkinses of the 1970s.
Yes.
How do you
Back
feel?
to the future.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel about working for one of them rather than a multi-billion entity?
Oh, I'm at an age in my life where I really value the time with the people I work with. So whether it's my partners or whether it's the entrepreneurs that we invest in, for me, the only thing that doesn't scale is time. The number of boards you can sit on, the number of entrepreneurs you work with. And so at Ignition, we're very focused on picking disruptive companies, but very much we focus on the jockey, not the horse, because we bet on people, and that is, and our relationship with them is what ends up driving the outcome.
One of the people you backed is Eric Swan, the
Yes.
co-founder of Splunk. Talking earlier today, he said he liked to find a problem that is ugly and hard and sucks, which I thought was a great quote.
Yeah.
How do you feel about investing in businesses that are trying to deal with ugly, hard, sucky problems?
Well, I think the notion of sucky is interesting because I think it all, like in all things, it has to do with context. What might be sucky for one person is completely tolerable for another. So the level of suckiness has to be big enough and across a large enough population that you think there could be a big company there. And so what Splunk was working on was a very broad problem that really hadn't been addressed and touched a lot of people. And so it was unglamorous at the time, but the funny thing is then when you build a big company, it becomes glamorous. And now I would argue that big data in many respects became sort of the category catch-all term for a lot of different Splunk kind of projects that are going on right now.